All right, everyone. Hello, it's Shepard here, but I guess something a little bit different. New to the channel, just so you know, stream basically every day, twitch.tv/SDShepard, mostly stream Monster Hunter. Today we're talking about Monster Hunter. We're not really talking about my runs, though. Those of you who've known me for a little while know that I did quite a lot of speed running in Monster Hunter World. Sometimes referred to as full game speedruns or RTA. You know, I know it doesn't seem like a thing that is very popular in Monster Hunter, but it is kind of an interesting way to play the game. You just start with a new character, go all the way until you beat the game or get to a certain checkpoint. It was fun. It was good content, especially while it lasted. I will be honest and say that my enjoyment of full game speedruns diminished. Not because of I just didn't like playing the game anymore. I still play Monster Hunter every day, but Iceborne with Claw Stagger and weapon changes, and especially like Guardian and Defender gear, really removed a lot of the challenge or just changed the game as I liked it. Yeah, about the only thing that they did that I really liked was they added a bunch of tracks that made it a little bit faster to get to that section, which wasn't a very good section. So just so you know, this is a thing. So full game speedrunners for Monster Hunter is a thing. There's categories you can go through. Generally speaking, you're going to be going through just whatever the main story until the credits. So a little while ago, about maybe a month and a half ago, just before Rise came out, there was a conversation on the Speedrun.com Monster Hunter Rise forum. And the question was a community poll to allow or disallow turbo mode for Rise. Now, I want to let you guys know, this is bizarre for me. I almost never go to speedrun.com. And when I do go, I almost never go to the forum. To be quite honest with you, I don't even know how I found this post. But I did. So the topic was started by Gemini MH. Gemini MH, as of today, is a moderator for Monster Hunter Rise RTA. They might check individual levels or individual TA runs as well. I'm not quite sure. And their question was, we know that a $20 Hori controller, I'll show it up on screen here, has the ability to cause light bowguns and heavy bowguns to fire faster. So for those of you who aren't really familiar with the way the inner workings of Monster Hunter and most video games are in general, usually the way these games work is they kind of work a little bit off of like frame logic, or at the very least Monster Hunter does. Can't say it's great all the time, but whatever. I'm used to it and most people are used to it. And what it does is it'll say, okay, for whatever it is you're going to do, have you pressed a button at the right time? Or in some cases, have you pressed the button before the buffer radius is up or gone or whatever, in order to be able to do your next action. The way bowgun works is it doesn't really have a buffer, at least as far as I can tell. So you really have to be more or less perfect with your inputs on this weapon in order to get your shots out on time and accurately. And so, if you want to have very fast, very consistent shots, you use a turbo controller. And so this was a question was, are we going to allow turbo mode? And there was a lot of discussion here. For my sake, my one input on it was, if you're going to use it, just say you're going to use it. It's not stock, so I would say it would have to be in its own category. This is my own personal opinion. If you're ever going to do any sort of tool-assisted thing, you're not committing a crime. You haven't hurt anyone, but at least in terms of whatever integrity you want to believe exists in terms of doing something competitive like a speed run and then putting that up on the internet as a thing that you did, I think it's reasonable for us to all say that if you're doing it, you should at least admit it. So Gemini chimes in and says, I've seen so far dissenting opinions are not gunners, so this won't really affect them. I didn't want to say, only gunners are allowed to vote in this manner because that's lame. So oddly enough, I would say this doesn't appear to have been a forum topic that Gemini necessarily started assuming that there'd be a full discourse. It feels as if they started the discourse wanting there to be a consensus that turbo is fine, and if you needed to put a category on it, you could. Now, one way or another, I thought to myself, whether it's approved or not, I'm pretty sure this is going to come up. This is a thing that is extremely difficult to detect. you're talking about something that you would really need to analyze frame timings. People are going to submit runs with it, and it's going to come down to the community to check it out. But maybe Light Bowgun won't be all that good. Maybe we won't see it. Lo and behold, not 2 weeks or so after the game came out, maybe a month, I don't know. Number 1 in the world, Gemini MH with Light Bowgun. Now, I don't want to sound like the sort of guy or act like the sort of guy to be just automatically assume, oh, you got number 1 in the world, you must be cheating, right? Because that's not right? That's not fair. I mean, there's a lot that goes into a run that has nothing to do with how often you press the right shoulder button. You know, there's your menuing, there's your routing, there's RNG, there's how many runs you're willing to do. You know, there's a lot of things that go into a run. And if there's anything that anyone takes out of this video, I would like to say that if you are a speedrunner and your dream someday is to have internet superstardom and have all the people fawning over your amazing godlike speedrun abilities, I'd say speed matters a bit. Yeah, you got to at least be okay at the game. But don't assume that if your time is a bit faster or even best in the world, that's necessarily going to help you get the internet superstardom that you may or may not want. Because in my case, you know, I can go back to my runs on Iceborne or whatever, and I submitted a lot of them, and I submitted a wide category of runs. I had a couple world records. I certainly had less world records than I didn't. Maybe a couple points throughout my career in doing that. Maybe I had the overall fastest time. Can't really say. Don't really know. But I do know people enjoyed my runs with the way that I did them, and that was that. Moving on, I watch the run, and I inspect it, and I say, man, that looks like a really fast shot timing on that Light Bowgun. Now, at this point, I didn't have any analysis or any proof or anything. I go ahead and post a comment under the Speedrun Discord. I say, hey, is there consensus or ruling on the usage of turbo controllers for TA or RTA? RTA, again, being full game speedruns. I look up the topic, but it doesn't appear to have a resolution. I don't see anything under the rules. Gemini again. Banned for RTA. Allowed for TA. Whenever we add TA rules as a category, there'll be a marker so people can be transparent about the use of it. As all runs at the moment are freestyle, there's no reason to add anything for that. Extros, again, relevant. How would one even be able to detect a turbo controller? And then the idiotic master, maybe the genius master, says, supremely consistent fire rate on bowguns. And I want for all of you to remember one word out of that line, which is to say, consistent. Jal Beigel chimes in. He's a moderator. Didn't we determine the firing rate with turbo was possible with human input too? And we are going to get to that. Idiotic Master again, it is, but the consistency in landing it is basically frame perfect for 3 hours is nuts for a human. Okay, so this is the first main discussion. I actually checked out at this point. It was only recently that I checked back in to see what else was going on there. And for some reason, he keeps talking. Turbo isn't even consistent because the game drops enough frames. It's only a benefit because it reduces fatigue. And for Alora runs, we can't be sure if people are using it. Our idea was to allow it to give people the option to tell others they use it for the people who think it's cheating. Again, I want to just be super clear here. Whether it's cheating or not, if a category says expressly, you're not going to use a turbo controller, I think you could all agree it's pretty clear you can't use a turbo controller. I mean, it's like saying, we're going to play softball, and you come with a real, a Louisiana slugger and an actual baseball. It's similar, but are you going to have an advantage? You're going to be able to knock things farther and whatnot? I think so. And I think this is, like, to me, already almost a confession anyways. All right, so here we are. We're 10 minutes in. Let's go ahead and get up on screen right now. What exactly goes on when you use a turbo controller versus a non-turbo controller. So what you're going to see on screen right now, I'm going to have two little screens side by side. One is going to be turbo. The other one's going to be non-turbo. All of them labeled, just so you know, although it will be very apparent very quickly which one is faster versus the other. So I went and I took myself the same gun all these guys were using, and I brought it to the training area. And so for one, I'm using that $20 Hori controller with turbo on the right trigger. And the other one is just me mashing away on the right trigger, doing the best I can to try and get shots out as quickly as possible. Now, the interesting thing about this is, remember before when I was saying that frame times would be consistent with turbo controllers. So let's talk a little bit about that first, because this is actually the easy thing to discuss. So I have, let's see here, about 22 samples of volleys. And what I did is I started the frame timing from the very first shot until the very last shot. And essentially, you get yourself a pattern. The way these turbo controllers work is they hit a certain number of inputs per second. I believe it's called a polling rate. And apparently it's like 15 frames per, or 15 inputs per second. Now, obviously there's 30 frames in a second. For this to have, in theory, perfect polling, you would need to have it shooting or pressing the button 30 times a second. So what we get is actually a really interesting and recognizable pattern, which is essentially 82, 86 repeating. I did have one outlier. It's hard to say whether it's the controller or the game or even the video capture software, but it's essentially 82, 86. I had one that came out at 81, but it's 82, 86. When we analyze our non-turbo experience, it's different. So if I were to take an average poll, it just varies so widely. You know, I have polling numbers as high as 95. I have polling numbers as low as 83. Oddly enough, out of all of those polling numbers, I do not have any 82s or any 86s for that matter. Neither of those exist. I'm not saying they couldn't exist. They could exist, but you would have to hit the exact frame timing possible in order to get that metric down. So it's 82 or 86. So what I did is I started looking at frame footage from the fastest speedruns that are there. So let's talk a little bit about the people involved here. Gemini Monster Hunter, I'm not sure if I'd heard of them before. I think they're relatively new to moderating at speedrun.com and under Monster Hunter Rise. They said some fairly rude things about Iceborne players. I didn't learn about that until I already started this, but I mean, that's neither here nor there. I mean, they're willing to volunteer, and I want to be very clear. People that are moderators on these boards, they're volunteer. They're not paid. They're not God, right? So they are not geniuses, okay? They're not automatically assumed to always get everything right 100% of the time. You know, but even still, you would assume that these are people that you can trust. You know, they are observing something that is semi-competitive when it comes to these sort of things. You know, a lot of people rely on speedruns as like a Hail Mary attempt to get themselves into something like a GDQ or maybe an ESA. And when they get into those sort of venues, you know, that could be huge for their career as a speedrunner or as a streamer in general. I mean, many runners have, you know, really only blown up. You know, I think we had a video about Zeus at one point. You know, I believe it was a run at a GDQ that really got him a significant audience. So the stakes are definitely there. The stakes are there no matter what as a speedrunner to try and do well. And we have to trust and believe that, you know, all of the moderators are working together to make sure that, at least to the best of their ability, that these runs are being submitted, that are valid. And it's not just a matter of, you know, well, somebody used a turbo controller, but, you know, whatever. I mean, it's just a turbo controller for them. You also have to think about how does it affect the people that also submitted their runs that were maybe 5 minutes slower, 10 minutes slower, or whatever, that didn't cheat? Where would their run be in the rankings? Could they have gone from 7th to 6th, 6th to 5th, 5th to 4th, whatever. Those are all things that are relevant. Could the fastest possible light bowgun that had been on this list been even faster because the other people were using some sort of banned hardware for the category? So on to the analysis. Knowing our pattern, 82-86, 82-86, 81-86, I started examining patterns from Gemini. And, relatively quickly, not even going in super deep and really comparing everything like beat for beat, I started to find, 82, 82, 185. And I'm like, man, I started lining it up. It was like frame for frame, exactly where I am with my turbo controller. And so in the course of the investigation, I said, well, let's see if the person who approved it has anything to say about it. So I messaged Extro, who, I didn't even realize until just now was also the person that had chimed in to say, how would you even know whether or not this was, a turbo controller? Now, Extra, again, I don't know much about. Apparently, they did some runs or something with Team Darkside. Currently, number 1 for no tools speedrun in the village with light bowgun. And I said, wow. So, Extra had verified Gemini's run, and Gemini had verified Extra's run. If they were both using turbo controllers, would they also cover for each other? And so I then went to the next logical step and I said, well, what happens if I start examining Extra's run? Now, I will say this. As far as I can tell, they are either not using it consistently, they're using it differently, or maybe it's just some bad luck. But I can say there are at least a couple examples here where you can see 86 and 82 line up exactly with the polling rate. Now, could that have happened over the course of a 2-hour run? Absolutely. And so I want to say, I'm not necessarily saying anything specific about Extra other than to say you're a light bowgun user. You're aware of turbo controllers. This might have been an issue. Why did you verify Gemini's run? I would like to know that. I would like to know if you're using a turbo controller. That's probably helpful to know as well. And so where do we go from here? Is this a thing? I can show my data. I'm showing my data now. I can show the footage of it. This is not a happy day. This is not a good day. I've done competitive Monster Hunter in the past. I've competed at a bunch of tiny tournaments that were just held at Nintendo of America. I did okay. I don't think I won any of them. Maybe I won one, I don't know. Won 2018 NA Championship, got second place 2020, got fourth place in World, whatever. Competitive Monster Hunter is cool, and it's interesting, and races, and pushing yourself to the limit of what you're able to do, memorizing the routing, just menuing in the damn game in a speedrun can be a major challenge. And there's a lot of ways that you can really shine and make up time versus the other players. But, you can go through as many trials as you want. At the end of the day, it's not just a matter of consistency. There's just alternating 82, 86 inputs. Unless you're an actual god and you've got the ability to directly interface with the chipset on your controller, you're just almost never likely going to be able to hit that sort of consistency. And even if you could, you can count on the rhythm and pattern of a turbo controller well above and beyond whatever it is you can do between, mashing a button properly. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think this is something that needs to be addressed by the moderators over at speedrun.com. Do you think turbo controllers are a big deal or not? I think it's a little, irrelevant. I think it's already clear that this was illegal hardware that was used on a run that expressly forbade it, spoken by somebody who clearly said this was something that cannot be used. So in regards to what happens to Gemini and their runs, I mean, I think in my original post, I think I said something along the lines of, banned from further submissions and all runs removed. It seems pretty harsh now because, you can only assume that nobody would have ever done it. But to have done it and lied about it and been a moderator and then got another moderator involved, I don't really know what else you can do to try and keep some sort of integrity in place for, this category. Which, by the way, I haven't spoken about the village category yet. It's not even that good of a category. I mean, it's easy. It's boring. So why you would practice and spend so much time blowing your load, possibly jeopardizing your reputation over a category that it's not even that entertaining to watch anyways is kind of beyond me. But that's it for now. There's still kind of a lot for me to process anyways, but it is what it is. Until next time, this is Shepard saying I love you. Good luck and have a good hunt.